Anyway, I think most of you know where to find the tastings on our website. And it says I can't share to the meeting, the waiting room, because there's no one in it. That makes perfect sense. So there's the link to the website if you don't know where to find it. So we have 5 whiskeys, 3 rums tonight. And I'll be honest, despite the fact that at one point in time, I hosted the rum tastings at the store. It was a different time. Rums back then were simpler, kinder, plainer, more generic. So we've asked Doug to join us. So we've got Sean and Doug on the rum side of things. Harmony's sort of rum, but more whiskey like me. And the 3 rums we have tonight are from a couple of unusual distilleries. They're older rums. One of them, I think, at least is in an ex-whiskey cask. Regardless, this is going to be some fun. So I think we should just dive right in, if that's all right with everybody. Bruichladdich 18, and if you're wondering why we did the 18 before the 10, in my mind, that just makes sense. The 18 is going to be a little softer, a little lighter, and it's going to have had a bit more time to kind of mellow out in the cask because we were talking cask strength, and it is a lower ABV, 53.5, whereas the 10-year-old is 62.5. So this is the Rest and Be Bruichladdich 18-year. I don't even have a tasting note up for this one yet. It's fairly new. I started writing one. I think it just never got around to putting it out. So here we go. 18 years, ex-Bourbon. With some of these casks with Rest and Be Thankful, which is part of Fox Fitzgerald Group, we don't know exactly where they come from, but we have a theory, and my theory is this. Fox Fitzgerald manages Waterford Distillery, which is owned by Mark Renier. Mark Renier used to own Bruichladdich, presumably has a bunch of casks of Bruichladdich. 4 of the 5 whiskeys in tonight's tasting are from Bruichladdich Distillery, and at least one of the rums is finished in an ex-Bruichladdich cask or matured in an ex-Bruichladdich cask. So to me, it kind of seems like all the pieces fit together there to suggest that these are probably Mark Renier or someone Mark knows casks. But we jumped on this one partly because Bruichladdich ex-Bourbon especially can be absolutely lovely. 53.2%, I think. Yeah, that's what I said. And there it is. So let's dive in on the nose. Sean, you're already a step ahead of me there. You're chewing your whiskey. What do you think of this Bruichladdich 18 on the nose?
I was trying to prime my palate because I haven't had anything at all today. Well, except for like a super light beer. But this, I mean, with the exception of their range, I really only have so much experience with it. But this is really kind of turning that cheesiness onto turbo mode. It's like it's pretty intense.
It's like cheddar cheese and cupcakes.
Oh, I was thinking like cheese stuffed Smokies.
Cheese stuffed Smokies.
Like if you get the Smokies with cheese in it.
Oh, you like a pocket dog?
No.
Oh no, a smoke. Yeah, I get it. The sausage has cheese in it. Okay.
Yeah. It's kind
Some
of
nice
got
fruit
that
underneath.
cheesiness.
Yeah, nice fruit underneath it as well. It leans into like the not tropical, but definitely the lighter side of like pineapple-y kind of juice.
There's some nice firm citrus like lemon, orange, a
Mm-hmm.
bit of melon. Our friend Doug there is either contemplating very slowly or in and out of speed up, slow down mode on his video feed. Doug, what do you think of the nose? You're muted, by the way.
First of all, thank you for that. Second of all, apologies for the internet connection. It's been super sketchy today. Third of all, this kind of takes me to like back to Minnesota, where I'm having a piece of apple pie with cheddar cheese on top, right next to a fire, if that makes sense.
Very Midwestern.
Sounds like a great time. But this does have that in here for me too. Like it's very by the fire. Like even the sausages, like they're being cooked on a fire. There's definitely apple and fruit. It's really nice. I was thinking pear, like a poached pear for me. This is beautiful.
I mean,
Andrew, you make a good call on that melon. I think like even on the palate, there's a big chunk of like fresh cantaloupe that translates really well into the palate.
Yeah, on the palate, I'm getting more white fruit, melon, a little bit of citrus in there as well. It's very creamy, it's very soft. You know, it's funny, it's been so long, but like when Bruichladdich launched, my memory has it that they had like 10, 15, 18, I think was their core range in the mid 2000s. And I mean, this isn't really like that. Like, I think that was a much lighter style whiskey. It was legacy stock. It wasn't stuff they'd made themselves. Whereas this, I mean, it's got that modern Bruichladdich DNA all over it. It's very malty. It's got that cheesy tone there. Lots of fruit. And, you know, with these rest and bee bottlings, I mean, oftentimes there's not reviews out there before we buy them. So we're buying them a bit on a gamble. And some of the wine casks that we've had from them before were like not the best, and others were great. But how can you screw up Bruichladdich and bourbon cask for 18 years?
I think this is such a lovely palette on it. And when the distillery was selling a lot of those casks to the private market, whether it be for insiders or outside, there was a ton of wine, tons of sherry. It feels like there was less of these beautiful sort of bourbon casks that really let the distillate shine through in such a beautiful way, like this has.
Yeah, it people making comparisons to Loch and Dahl, but without the peat or without the smoke. It's quite minerally as well too. Like there's quite a minerality to it. I find that on a lot of Bruichladdich whiskeys, but especially in that ex-Bourbon stream, which is a little bit cleaner and more transparent in style. And salty. I mean, this is also, you know, one of the things that I think must be acknowledged and said to Bruichladdich credit is they are one of the few distilleries on Islay to mature all their whiskey on Islay. And that has to play some role to an extent. You know, the more of the process you do there, the more opportunity there is for elements of the natural environment to soak in. But there's quite a pronounced saltiness to me on the palate on this as well. Anyway, cool. Well, nice starting point. Let's see what it tastes like or smells like when you knock 8 years off of the age statement. So we're going to do the Bruichladdich 10-year-old. Again, ex-bourbon barrel, cask 4310 for those who are curious. Bottled at a cask strength of 62.5%. I have had the privilege of tasting this one previously. I think the 18 is just still on the list. But there you go. Maybe Harmony will start with you this time. What do you get on the nose on the Bruichladdich 10-year-old?
It's like it smells definitely not as cheesy, a little bit spicier, more caramel, brown sugar.
It is sweeter on the nose for sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then leather, I would say. Sweet.
It says it's kind of like opening up a bag of those chalky Valentine's hearts with the messages on them. And then
the
a
ones
big
that
chunk.
are neither sweet enough nor taste all that good.
Yeah, they're pretty bland, but I mean they have that chalky kind of powdered sugar like kind of note.
Yeah. Doug, do you have any thoughts on the nose? Or are you struggling with this one?
It's interesting. It's a little bit more. I'd love to leave this for a couple of hours just to let the oxygen attack it. I feel like it would really let some more stuff go. But I totally get that powdered sugar nose, and again, in some interesting aspects, it almost reminds me of like almost a rum nose where there's a slight molasses sort of style note to it, considering having some rums to finish off the evening.
Your nose is not getting just a little bit ahead of you.
I mean, it could be that the rum later on in the tasting is already perfuming my room. I think so.
For sure. The nose, quite malty. That cheesy note is still there, a little bit of salinity as well. Sean, you'll probably get this more than anyone else, but it reminds me of that creme de Bourgogne cheese. And then like with maybe a little bit like a lemon slice or something beside it. But especially if you're like factoring in the rind, like the cheese rind as well.
Mm.
Yeah, that slight stinky bit. Like, yeah, creme de Bourgogne is a good one. I was thinking like ricotta when you squeeze lemon in there too, and you just kind of whip it up.
Yeah, the palate's got a really sort of lemon and ricotta note to it, which is interesting. Almost with like a hint of like Sprite.
Mm.
I don't know. There's like an effervescence to it.
The palate is quite sweet, honeyed. That cheesy note is still there. I think I had this more down originally for the nose than the palate, but like there's something that kind of reminds me of like Greek yogurt or like Turkish yogurt, which is more of an accompaniment to a meal than something you just eat on its own. It's like a something you layer on top. But there's a bit more fruit on the palate, and those sweet notes Harmony was talking about on the nose. There's some of that there as well.
There's this neat kind of acidity on the sides of my palate that reminds me of like a sweet tomato or something, where it's kind of fruity, kind of vegetal, kind of not quite vitamin C or sorry, citric acid, but something leaning into that.
Yeah. And it still has that kind of like grassy, flinty minerality to it on the palate as well, which I don't know, maybe that's part of the Bruichladdich style. Maybe that's the bourbon casks that they're sourcing. Yeah, it's very tasty. It's young. I think it's kind of exactly what I would like from a young Bruichladdich. At cask strength at 62.5%. Yeah, it's quite pretty. Harmony,
Oh, sorry.
catching up with, oh, sorry, go ahead, Dougie.
I was just going to ask, what generation of Bruichladdich is this? Had it been sold at this point in 2013, 2014?
That's an interesting thought. I think it might have been a little later than that. Like, well,
Later
there
than
must
that.
be a fact checker here, but I've got my malt whiskey yearbook, so allow me to consult it. Maybe Jeff Sergio will beat me to it by a moment. But let's see here. Where is the buyout? There's a lot of talk of the whiskeys. Anyone? We're we're trying to figure out what year Remy Cointreau acquired the distillery to see if this cask might have been before or after that date. Oh, 2012. So yeah, that's an interesting thought that they acquired it. Now, I don't remember what happened with Renier, but I know like Simon Coughlin and some of the other owners were kept around. Maybe Mark was still around in 2013 and exercised his right to purchase casks, but who knows? It's hard to say. I do know that he probably would not have fit in for long in said environment if he'd been invited to stay, which I don't know for sure.
No, he was just out front of the distillery eyeing up the still that had been on display there before he took it for Waterford.
That's right. That's too bad. I always love driving by there with the rubber boots sticking out of it as if there was a person in there. Anyway, Harmony, did you want to say anything about the Bruichladdich 10-year-old on the palate before we move on?
It was just like I found it very salty, and kind of acidic, but yeah, I think it just needs more time right now for me.
Okay, very cool. All right, let's mosey on down to the Bruichladdich 17 year. And I know there was some machinations on the chat about one of the photos not being correct, but I think that might be more of the Port Charlotte issue than a Bruichladdich issue. So I think we're safe on this one. So this is one of those ones where, I think we were lucky enough to get a sample of this one before we bought it, because, you know, as I said, with the Bruichladdich, with the wine casks, they can be good, but they can also be not so much. But the color on this looks really promising. Like, it doesn't look wine cask to me. This looks more characteristic of a sherry cask. And then even when you get to the nose, I don't know, it doesn't immediately leap out to me as being winey. Like, it doesn't smell winey. It seems more reminiscent of a classic sherry cask on the nose. Doug, you're already unmuted, so maybe I'll start with you for your
Yeah.
take.
I mean, the color and the nose kind of hits me like it's a European oak where you just get a bit more of that nuttiness, and certainly the color, you get usually a much darker and richer color out of a European oak than you would out of
Like
an American
oak
or
wine
something
or American
else.
oak wine. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know if I could tell you off the top of my head what the wine varietal might be.
No. Well, I mean, part of me is thinking, like, is it port? I mean, but wouldn't they just say it's a port cask if it had been used for port as opposed to it's a wine cask? Sean, what are your thoughts on this?
You're right when you mentioned like earlier sherry, and in fact, well, a lot of the stuff that I might have seen like in that 2013 coming into the shop, and there's a bunch of stuff that kind of reminds me of like maybe like some of the, like that Bowmore Devil's Cask or something like that, which might have some of those sherry influences without being so, you know, smoky, obviously. A nice hidden medicinal note on the nose as well that I actually quite like. It's tough. As soon as you sip it, it definitely, like, there's a disjointment between the palate and the nose. It doesn't taste like sherry. I think you can tell right away that it's wine, but not in
Harmony,
a bad way, I would say.
thoughts on the nose before we move on? Or are you already on the as well?
Yeah, to me, it's wine, but there's still that like a cheesiness in here as well, which is very characteristic, showing through, and dates, and yeah, there's definitely wine influence in this that I wouldn't say is sherry.
Jeff, to your question about wine knowledge and region and grapes, I'm going to go Bordeaux and Merlot dominant. So I don't remember what bank that is because I'm not predominantly a wine guy, but one bank is Cab, the other is Merlot. Paul Giamatti obviously has a stronger preference for one of them than the other. But it is very winey on the palate. It's very, like, a little bit meaty, leathery, loads of tobacco. And if I were to guess what wine style this was based on the profile of the whiskey, I would say it's like a Brunello or something from like Priorat in Spain, like just a really dry, dark, austere red wine. But this is Marc Renier. This is almost certainly from Bordeaux. Like, that's where most of their wine casts. I think there's some Burgundy, but it's almost all Bordeaux.
Two really quick comments on that. First of all, I actually really, really love this. I think there's some of the Bruichladdich wine casks that aren't necessarily my style, but I feel like this is actually really quite lovely, considering the amount of time that it's spent in the cask. And number two, I just watched a Paul Giamatti interview talking about the classic Merlot thing, and his comment was he didn't actually have any strong feelings about Merlot, but when they went through the whole list of different wines, Merlot was the funniest that they used. So he not only used Merlot, but inadvertently created a depression in Merlot.
Yeah, no, it actually had demonstrable impact on wine sales from certain varietals. I mean, if I were him, I would have said go after Cab Franc, like leave Merlot alone, but or Carmenere, maybe go after Carmenere. But anyway, what are you gonna do? I agree with you. The palate on this is lovely. It's not over the top. It reminds me of the best of the Black Arts Bruichladdich, where you have the wine cask, but it's not overly winey, or it's not so winey and so tannic that it becomes a struggle.
Yeah.
Oh man. Sean, you already commented. Harmony, like, you commented, you found the nose winier than the rest of us, but how do you like the palate?
I like the palate a lot, and I don't mean this at all in a bad way, and I'm not trying to offend any beer people at all, but the palate reminds me of like certain types of like porters, and different kind of dark beers, like brown beers. I don't know why, but it's got that going on for me.
Maybe like a wine aged porter or wine barrel aged porter.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know anything about beer, so. But no, I like it. There's tons of fruit, texture,
mhm.
leather, chocolates. You can feel the wine tannins kind of, or like oak tannins. It's aged, it's in there, and it's well put together.
Well, not underneath the spices and the leather, like there's a lot of fruit there. Raisins, cranberries, like more for me, a lot more red berry fruits. But yeah, it's very drinkable. I mean, well, here's the barometer. I like it, but would Kurt like it, or would he still hate it?
This is a rare one where I feel like our friend Wojtek and Kurt would actually both like it.
Really? Because
Just
it's
I-
meaty and leathery enough for Wojtek, but not so tannic that Kurt
Yeah,
just his nose
you
bunched up.
might have to blind Kurt on this one.
Mm,
It just might help.
it's a good idea. Anyway, it drinks well. We'll see how it evolves in the glass over the course of the tasting. And at least for the whiskey side of things, we're now onto and now for something completely, well, not really completely different, but sort of different. We're gonna head over to the other side of Isla for Kalila. We've got the Rest and Be Kalila 14-year-old. Let me put that up on your screen here. Nice to know that Kalila was selling Mark Renier casks. Just kidding. I don't think there's a direct connection on that, but 14 years, 56.7%. To me, yeah, I just wanted to have a quick review of my own notes there from when I wrote this one up, but this is one of those rare Kalilas that ticks all the boxes for me, but I won't tell you why just yet. Doug, you look like you're ready to roll on this one.
Oh, well, first of all, any tasting that has Kalila in the first half, not even in the second half of the tasting, both it excites me and scares me. But I think, this is just such a beautiful expression. I'm a huge Kalila fan. But I think this is, there's some lovely lemon and iodine and a little bit of saltiness in there. I mean, it's definitely from Isla. It's a different style than we had in the first three, but again, for the age and certainly the price, I could certainly crush a bottle or a case of this fairly easily, I feel like.
This is too long a name, but if I were to name this whiskey the way the society does, just based on the nose, it would be Arnold Palmer's and an ashtray full of cigarette butts in a hot tub.
Wow. Now is Walter in that hot tub with you?
No, I hope no. I hope the hot tub is not a good place for a Walter, for many reasons.
Just a worm tub.
Just a warm tub. Well, there's quite an ozony, chlorini note on the nose. The peat is quite ashy to me, and you're starting to get some of those like slightly fatty bacon notes, and it's a little bit seafoody, not a ton on the nose. The nose is still a little naked. Anyway, Sean, you're nodding. What do you want to say about this one?
I can't remember if you really like that, the fatty bacon tones of it. And I feel like sometimes Kalila can really lean into that. This doesn't quite get there, and I actually like that better. There's other times where I find it starts to lean into like this wood smoky, savory, meaty part, which I don't mind at times, but I actually really like this more oceanic, like you said, ozone, salty, iodine, this more slightly I don't know. I guess I'm not really sure how else I would describe it except for those words, but this is a lot of the younger ones we've seen kind of fit that bill that I mentioned. It's some of the later ones, this is like when it says 12 above, that's when I really start kind of paying attention and kind of hoping for these kind of notes. Yeah, it's pretty wicked.
So on the nose, I didn't get the bacon, but I definitely get it on the palate. But anyway, Harmony, thoughts?
This is the kind of Caol Ila that I like. And I think, Sean, I understand what you're saying about those overly baconed woody notes where it just Caol Ila can be so pretty and perfect and smoky and briny all at the same time without having to go into that style of peat. And this is one of those styles that I think just is really what I love about Caol Ila.
Doug, have you tasted it now as well?
Yeah, I think the just hinting on sort of that bacon fat, which again is sort of one of two styles of Caol Ila that I really get. There's again, it's light and bright, but there's also that underlying fatty sort of ashiness that I think can be really lovely. And for me, this is a style of Caol Ila I can drink today, but could actually let sit on the shelf for a decade, and I feel like it would just mature into something absolutely beautiful as well.
And when you say sit on the shelf, do you mean in bottle or in the cask?
Yeah, in bottle, where you're actually getting like the esters and congeners starting to like break down and just sort of round out a little bit. There's a sharpness to this. I just feel like some of those that sort of like lemon and sort of, you know, salty sea air would just really shine through over time.
There you go. So what I was hinting at before was the Caol Ila, what I believe are the three Caol Ila styles. There's the bacon Caol Ila, there's the seafood Caol Ila, and then you get the bacon wrapped seafood Caol Ila. And I think that this one is starting to go into that bacon wrapped seafood style where it's like the best of both. But yeah, nice sweetness to it.
Some bacon wrapped scallops down on the pier in front of the distillery.
Yeah. With like a sweet lemon chutney or something on top of it. Really tasty. I mean, man, you know, it's funny, like we'll joke about this or talk about how Caol Ila is the distillery that's hard to screw up. The whiskey that's hard to screw up, or it's like almost infallible. I mean, I have had a couple of dreadful ones. There's not been many, but there have been a couple. But yeah, you put Caol Ila in bourbon and it'll be good. Even if it's tired, old, and the cask does almost nothing other than oxidize the spirit, it'll still end up being good. All right, last whiskey of the tasting, at least for the first pass. We're on to the Port Charlotte, which may or may not have the right photo on our site. So I don't know if I want to put that one up or not, but one of the things that's cool about this particular release, though, is that we don't see a lot of older Port Charlottes. There's been a handful of independent bottlings, but they are somewhat rare. 14 years, ex-Bourbon, 57.4%. But I don't know. I'm looking at this. Sean, do you want to explain the controversy to me? Because this outwardly looks like the right photo. Is this not the right photo? It says 57.
No, I think that's the one. What's
ex-Bourbon cask, 1363, 12 or 1263. That looks
They
right.
meant the other Port Charlotte was wrong. The 2002.
Oh, one of the older ones we've got. Got it. Okay, well, we'll fix that later. Let's focus on this one for now. All right, Port Charlotte, peated, medium heavily peated Bruichladdich. I mean, that's the one thing I have to say that always confused me. Like, you know, they didn't really do a middle ground. They did heavily peated and super heavily peated. But what are our thoughts on this? This is sort of back in the hot tub, but maybe with like some vinegar. Harmony.
good call on
That-
vinegar.
Totally. The vinegar is a crazy call. I just was thinking about like potato chips with the vinegar on it. Just like, I don't know, something in that world was coming to my mind. And it's still got some cheese on here for sure.
Sean,
I love it.
do you remember Vincent, who used to work at the shop? French guy? And he would like spend most of his day cleaning things with vinegar.
I don't think I was there when he was there.
Yeah, anyway, nice guy. What do you think about this on the nose? Like,
It's that nice mix between a tiny little bit of cheese and a nice little farmy hit. It's very clean. Like it's almost too clean for Port Charlotte in a way. Like I sometimes get it a little bit dirtier, but this is quite elegant.
more medicinal than it is smoky.
Yeah.
Like I was getting almost a hit of like hairspray or acetone at one point too. Sort of settling down now into like lemon pledge.
For me, I completely take Sean's point about how clean this is. For me, there's like a memory of like grade 11 high school hosting a party, and there was like the smoked camembert that got spilled on the floor, and I'm trying to clean it up before my parents get home. That really hits home.
You had smoked camembert at your high school parties?
Well, again, it's a memory that's evocative of. I don't
Oh,
think
okay.
I didn't eat camembert in high school, nor do I think I hosted any parties.
It was between the foie gras and the caviar. What's the big deal?
Yeah, it's interesting. The camembert, like I mean, it is cheesy and it's got that kind of austere sort of cheesy note to it. But yeah, the smoke, this is not as peated as, I mean, and this is less peated than you would assume time would mellow on both the nose and palate. Like it should still have more oomph from the peat here. Harmony? Very chewy.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think it's really nice. I thought the first ones are really nice for different reasons, feeling more tropical. And this just feels definitely heavier, going in a different direction than the first ones. And obviously it's peated, but it's
Mhm.
it's very different.
It's sweeter on the palate than I thought it would be based on the nose and based on how pale it is.
My initial thoughts were it kind of reminded me of mezcal, like the
Mhm.
very first time I sipped it.
This has so much going on. This is a fantastic whiskey.
Yeah, very tarry, like sort of like steamed or smoked mussels on the palate.
This is like if Kalila tried to make a Port Charlotte, I feel like.
Cool note.
Yeah.
Any bacon?
I'm assuming this is like a second or third fill. It just feels like such a naked distillate.
Yeah. Doug, I don't know if you noticed, but Jeff was asking in the chat why your butler didn't clean up the camembert.
Oh, Jeff, usually I so enjoy your commentary during a tasting. This time I'm just going to leave it alone though.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to go back to the Kalila because nosing it and then going back to the Port Charlotte, I am getting more of like a tarry peat on it now on the nose. But though the phenols weren't really showing through this at all when we first started nosing and tasting it.
So being on the last whiskey before we move on to the rums, like even just nosing through the last five, this was such a cool lineup. Like everything shined in its own way. I don't think it was any real like there was no stinkers here. Everything was like, oh man, they were so good. What a cool lineup.
Yeah. Well, the noses on the first two are just they're like classic Bruichladdich clean, fruity, cheesy. That 17-year-old, like in a blind tasting, nose wise, I would have a hard time picking that out as wine cask. Like the closest wine cask analogy on that I could come up with would be maybe something like the Cavalan Vino, which is not really winey. It's more about the oak and the way the oak is seasoned. The Caol nose surprisingly becomes almost the most shy of the five, sorry, going back to it. But anyway, we'll let it sit, see how it does. So we're gonna dive into some rum here. And this is where I am, and I did not intend for this to be a pun, literally out of my depth. I've only had Long Pond and Monymusk a few times. I know you know, we've seen a few of them over the years, but these ones are a little bit on the unusual side. The first one I'm going to put up, this is Jamaica. ITP stands for Ive Trelawney Pot. Sean, maybe I'm going to butcher this. I should probably just put it up on screen and let you or Doug introduce this. What is Ive?
I don't know what Ive stands for, but Trelawney is the parish that distillery and the plantation. I guess maybe it would have been an ex-plantation, I guess, for Long Pond. What is?
Okay.
This is a low ester mark that is no longer made by Long Pond, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And Trelawney Estate is sort of in like the sort of central north of Jamaica. I think it's the only parish that has two rum distilleries inside of it. This and Hampton, which certainly has become pretty legendary in the last sort of 5 or 10 years. Both reside in sort of Trelawney.
Cool. All right. So bourbon cask, I don't know if we talked about that. 54.7%, and it was both tropical and continental aged. And I think that's something that maybe just a quick clarification for those who are new to rum. A lot of rum is brokered through ports in Europe and will spend time aging there as well as in the Caribbean. And then I suppose if someone acquires the rum, it could potentially age in another country wherever they decide to transfer it to. But so they'll talk about both tropical aging and continental aging. And then some brands will even tell you how many years. I know Cadenhead does this a lot. Exactly how many years it's spent in either the continent or in the tropics. So, Doug, you're unmuted. Do you want to take us off on the nose? Like this to me is like some sort of, I don't know, what I would imagine to be like some sort of weird Jamaican fruit pie or something on the nose.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, traditionally, a lot of rums, especially the British style of rums from sort of Jamaica and Barbados and Guyana and Trinidad, were sort of you know made for sort of the Navy. You got a pint of rum for lunch, a pint of rum for dinner. Then, sort of by the 70s, your tots, they took it down to a single pint because people were getting a little crazy, and then you know, we just hit, I think, around the 50th anniversary a couple of years ago of sort of the tots being ended in the British Navy, and so a lot of this actually went through a single broker in the Netherlands, where about 80% of it was used from anything from perfumes to like you know your dad's cookies that you got. There was a slight hint of rum that sort of added a bit of flavor and molasses to it, and it's only really in the last couple of decades where a lot of these sort of whiskey independent bottlers were starting to grab on to some of the rums that were sort of brought over. They would be aged in sort of, you know, Jamaica or sort of the tropics. They would be put in a big sort of plastic container, brought over, and then sort of recast often into whiskey casks. And so this is in Jamaica, they use sort of what they would call in the US a triple thumper. So it's a pot still, but it's a single continuous triple distillation through pots, all in one shot, and then brought over. And so it's, for me, it's sort of a classic style where there's sort of like some varnish and a little bit of petrol, but also sort of that underlying fruitiness, which can be quite lovely. And I feel like I've almost come to blows with a couple of rum friends over what some of the great sort of distilleries in Jamaica, because Jamaica has some of the funkiest stuff out there. But I'll stop and pass it over to Sean, who knows much more than I do on this sort of stuff.
I mean, you nailed a lot of it. I do, I guess, I don't know. I was gonna go more so into the nose and whatnot, but like on this guy, it's not only like cooked down pineapple. I was getting like pickled strawberries. Like I don't know, they used to have like
There's a real
preserved
pickled note
strawberry.
for sure.
Sorry?
There's a real pickled note for sure.
Yeah. And then Sammy said he was talking about Kalamata olives, and I agree with that. There's a bit of that slight more savory brine to it, which I mean, typically I would find more so on like a cane juice rum, but this one, even on the nose, is like it's pretty straight through molasses through and through. Like you can tell.
It's an interesting kind of blend of like the fruit notes, that sort of molasses sweetness, but then also this like funky medicinal character as well. Can one of you guys elaborate on like, they make a big deal now with like the esters in rum and the ester content. And I know, Sean, I think you said this is on the light end, but the description on our site says it's medium esters. Like, how are they influencing that? Like, is that a fermentation thing or is it a distillation thing?
Yeah, but I mean, I think between both Doug and I think we could probably tackle most of it. Like esters, like ester is a class of compounds. It's made from very specific kinds of molecules. When during fermentation, well, sorry, I guess to answer the later part of the question, it can be made through fermentation, distillation, and I recently learned a little bit even through maturation, which I didn't really know before. The ingredients to make an ester is pretty much just like a carboxylic acid and an alcohol. So fermented wash, you got plenty of alcohol in there. So you would just add some sort of carboxylic acid. In the case of Jamaica, it's in the form of what they call dunder or muck sometimes or whatnot. Which is just old stillage from the distiller, from a still run. They would collect it, and it would be very rich in that compound. I don't think it's right away. Maybe Doug knows a bit more about that, but I don't think it's immediately usable. I think they have to let it sit and kind of like go through its reactions and whatnot. But they add that to the wash. Alcohol and the acid combine together to make an ester very naturally. And depending on how much you add of that acid, is how much you might get out the other side. And so
Sean, please finish.
I was gonna say, you can also strip some of those out if you're using, say, column still. So pot still is definitely more favorable to those things at the end of the day. Yeah.
I mean, esters and congeners are in all like distilled sort of spirits, generally speaking, right? But in Jamaica specifically, there's a couple things that they're known for, right? Is sort of the open sort of washbacks where you're literally letting sort of the sort of
wild fermentation.
Yeah, wild fermentation rot. Right. Most distilleries are using some sort of yeast. In the case of Hampton, sort of the sister distillery to this, they don't even use yeast. It's only a wild fermentation. But part of it is also this sort of triple distillation, these double thumpers. Where you're actually you're not fully cleaning out the stills. And so in the second and third sort of pot distillation, you've got this less leftover stuff. In the case of Hampton, you're literally shoveling in sort of rotting matter from some of the previous, anything from the leftover sugarcane stalks. But I mean, a lot of this, I mean, the big difference is you've got sort of British distillation, which generally is using pot distillation. There are some columns, certainly in Jamaica and a couple of others, you're using these sort of double thumpers. You're using molasses. So generally, British colonies were used for sugarcane. You had molasses that was left over that was then distilled. The French style, which is often known as agricole, not always, Generally uses fresh cane juice, so that you can get some really, really funky stuff. That generally is through a column still. And then sort of this Spanish style is generally a column still with molasses and often some added molasses or other things into the barrel afterwards, just to sort of sweeten it up a little bit.
Yeah. So this, are the Spanish the only ones who are adding a sweetener?
I mean, in the case of Guyana, sort of diamond distillers, you can get some stuff, although it's come down. Over the last decade or two, there's a bunch of bloggers and others that will actually go in and test the levels of sort of additives in it. And so you've seen that come down over the years. But yeah, generally the Spanish style of rum is where you see the highest level of additives and sugar.
Interesting. And would that partially explain why, like, this nascent interest and growing interest in rum tends to be focused more on French and former English colonial rums because they're perceived to be a bit more pure?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a big part of it. I mean, it would be sort of the cleanest, most natural spirit of it. I mean, the French versus sort of British are different styles, but yeah, generally speaking, the rum nerds tend to gravitate towards those a little bit more.
So just like, so, because I think other people might probably be at this too, like with whiskey, if you want a fruitier spirit, like longer fermentations is like really the biggest one. And then, probably your cut, your distillation will have an impact too, because you risk losing some of that or muddying it if you get too much of your heads or tails in there. But with rums, there's a lot of it has to do again with that fermentation and trying to influence it to have the fruitiest profile possible, which is interesting to know that it's almost like a sour mash thing where you're like, the way you're achieving it is by throwing in either, a bit of leftovers from the last fermentation or, material that still has like sugars that can be converted and maybe a bit of an acidic content. Because, one of the best descriptions I ever heard, and apologies, I know some of you in tastings have heard this before, for why long fermentations are so key in whiskey is, at the Cotswolds, Dan Soar was explaining to us like his vision on this, and it was, when does a banana smell its most fragrant? And it's when it's basically rotten. And that's the principle of like creating those fruitier esters. But with rum, it's a little different. Maybe there's long fermentations, but it's also, you're influencing that fermentation to react in a certain way by adding things to it.
Yeah.
So,
well,
okay.
and certainly the pot distillation is going to give you a lot different sort of distillate than the column will for.
But I mean, and that would be true of whiskey as well, where, the more, like, that's the reason why grain whiskeys need so long to become interesting, is because essentially it's vodka that they've put into a cask. And it just needs time to absorb things and round out the rough edges and add character. But cool. All right, Monymusk. This is another rum, we've not seen a lot of over the years. So this is another Rest and Bee bottling. It's another one from, I believe, ex-Bourbon. Yeah, American oak barrels, 52.4%. I'm going to share it on screen here. And then it has the MMW mark. And Sean, maybe you can explain what that means.
It might be on, I might have made like full on notes there. Yeah, Monymusk Wedderburn. I can't remember. I can't exactly recall what Wedderburn is, but I do. I believe it was I'm gonna mess it up. I think it was a name of someone who owned a plantation, like historically. But again, I think this is still a mark. This is a mark that they are currently making. I think it is medium in its ester count as well, but it's going to be higher than the Monymusk that we just had, or sorry, the Long Pond that we just had. Um,
And it says Monymusk, but distilled at Clarendon. So is it a different style, but produced at the same distillery as different rums?
Kinda, yeah. I think if from what I've gathered is there's so much stuff going on in like Jamaica's like past distilleries, modern distilleries, the plantations, the consolidation. It's pretty interesting to like see the translation of marks between like distillery and distillery and whatnot. But Monymusk is the plantation that was there, and there I can't remember if there's a distillery historically, but and that's been there since the 1700s. Now it exists in the Clarendon parish, and now I believe the distillery is called Clarendon. Doug, you might correct me on that if I'm wrong. But they still make the Monymusk brand.
And there's only two distilleries on Jamaica that are 100% pot distilled, which is Hampton, which uses a combination of British and American stills. Hampton is the other one. The rest of them are generally a combination of column versus and some pot. Hampton and Worthy Park generally going into single casks. Both these brands, Long Pond and Monymusk, Clarendon, are sort of owned by sort of one of the big sort of brands inside of Jamaica, and are generally pushed into sort of a lot of the mass produced stuff, so sort of batched together with it. So it's really neat not only to be able to try some of the single distillations, but be able to try it at this age, even with some continental aging attached to it. Because, you know, similar to India or Taiwan with whiskey, you know, your losses are, you know, 8 to 10% a year plus in the tropics. So you're either topping up your barrels pretty significantly, or you've got, you know, 5 or 10% left after, you know, this kind of age, and are hoping that it's not just completely tannins and oak at that point.
Based on the profile, like I have to assume this spent the majority of its life in Europe, because it just seems like it's too delicate on the palate to be matured in the tropics and just like aggressively forced in and out of the oak. Yeah. And the nose is medicinal again. And you know, we started talking about this before at the start of the tasting. I mean, these don't really fall into that category, but a lot of the rums that I've had from Jamaica often have a rubbery or like an earthy note, much in the same way that like South African wines always seem to have this really earthy terroir note that's unique to South African wines. Is there something to that, or does it have more to do with how they're making the rum in Jamaica?
Sean,
That one I'm not entirely like the stuff that we predominantly perceive on our palate and the nose and whatnot, like when I say esters, and we're talking about like congeners, as Doug mentioned and whatnot. I mean, that is a portion of what's in that distillate. It's the same kind of thing when we're talking about like when we talk about red wine. I mean, it is just a mixture of organic compounds, and it's like hundreds and thousands, and all of those things can kind of like interact a little bit differently with your palate. So I think it might be some stuff. Well, actually, it could be a couple things. Like certain esters in high enough concentrations are going to start becoming solventy and really kind of intense. Like, I don't know. Organic is the only way I think of it, because I've kind of been through that schooling where that's what I've smelled. But I mean, other than that, it could also be like adjacent compounds aside from that that's not contributing as much to the fruitiness like the esters, but still, you know, going to be very prominent in the nose and palate.
Could this be the terroir that Marc Renier is chasing in rum?
I don't think so.
well,
I'm gonna be honest. I kind of don't. Maybe a hot take. I kind of don't think terroir exists in distillate.
ooh, Ooh, scandalous, I feel. Maybe the one thing that I'll mention before we get into the last one is it's just around the GIs, where it took well into the teens for Jamaica to come to an agreement on this, because basically governments throughout the Caribbean want there to be consensus through the distilleries for this. There's now one company that's trying to sort of scale back what the GI is in Jamaica, and that company might own all three of the rums rather that we're tasting this evening. One of the owners of that company also owns one of the major distilleries in Barbados, which currently is lacking a single distillery to get consensus for GI in Barbados as well. And as mentioned in the comments, I might have chastised this company in Paris at a recent spirits festival with it for ultimately holding everybody up. But again, there are some that are looking for the cleanest distillate, and there are some that are looking to age it in other locations, add a bunch of sugars and molasses and other additives, and still want to call it sort of, Jamaican or Barbadian rum. So there is spiritual conversations going on these days.
And by GI, you mean geographical indication and not gastrointestinal.
That is correct. Although if you drink enough, there will be effects on your gastrointestinal tracts as well.
Almost certainly.
Before we move ahead to I was searching something when Doug was talking about like the acid too, but does anybody in the chat or does anyone get a small hit whiff of vinegar on this one? Because I would be surprised if they didn't use just a tiny little bit of fresh sugar or like sugarcane vinegar on this one to as part of that acid additive.
Oh, I got it big time. The first note I wrote down was like pickled carrots. And then like tomato sweetened soup, more sugar, herbal rank vinegar. And it was like, but all good things, like it's just in there. And then it got like sugar and celery.
Yeah, so, like some distillers will use it more than others. Without like a cursory glance before here, I'm pretty sure both of these distilleries will use it, but in varying degrees for different marks. But like they'll make their own. Well, at least Long Pond I've seen specifically, they'll make their own in the distillery, where it's just like it's fresh sugarcane juice, and they'll toss the sugarcane stalks in there, and it looks freaking disgusting. It's just a vat of like a black vat with like old decaying cane stalks sticking out of it. It's crazy, but I mean that makes something beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah, quotes.
All right. Should we move on to the one that's different from the others? This is a Long Pond 22-year-old. It has the CRV mark, which has got nothing to do with Honda. Low ester column still, finished in an ex-Port Charlotte cask at 57.1%. So getting a little weird here. There it is on the screen. Doug, Sean, whichever one of you happens to know, what is the CRV mark?
Oh, I might be wrong actually. Maybe this is the one that they don't make anymore. I might have given you some misinformation on the first one.
I think the CRV is their lowest ester mark. Am I wrong in that?
It says low ester column still rum in the description. So
yeah, this is their lowest.
This would generally be for sort of a lot of the mass produced sort of white rums that you would be looking to sort of get out, use for sort of blended cocktails, sort of, the well liquor, if you will, in a lot of the bars by, maybe one of the largest spirits companies in the world, who generally pull this off. But I think maybe just a really quick note, the marks are really interesting. I mean, I wish Scotland did this, where, we see so many distilleries not allowing independent bottlers or even themselves in some cases use their own distillery name. In rum, you're able to have some of the same limitations, but because you might have upwards of 8 different styles of rum that's produced out of a single distillery, you might not be able to use the exact distillery name, but you can always use the mark. And so if you kind of know what you're looking for, if you know what the mark is, you can always tie it back to what the distillery is, as well as generally what the ester profile is, whether, certain marks might be between 0 and, 50, or quite frankly, in the case of Hampton, you're well into sort of, 14, 1600, sort of range for their different marks. So I mean, literally at that range, it really shouldn't be consumed by humans. It's meant for perfumes or for additives in baking. But there's some crazy folks out there that want to experience it and potentially
ruin their palates / possibly kill them.
Literally not only ruin their palates for that evening, but probably for most of the rest of the week. Just given, I think, how much it hangs on your palate.
This is the second time you've mentioned the perfume industry, which I find fascinating because based on my extensive knowledge of perfume gained from the TV show Futurama, I thought it had more to do with whale vomit than anything else. But that is my limited amount of knowledge about perfume manufacture.
Every perfumery is different, my friend.
Yeah, I don't think ambergris is used quite as much nowadays because I think it's a controlled substance, or at least like a restricted substance.
Probably killing whales to get their vomit, not necessarily good practice. I do have a provocative question to ask though. The nose on this is quite shy, but is the palate of this, does it make this the Lecheg of rums?
Oh, if you think this is the Lecheg of rums, I would say you haven't tried probably 7 of the top 8 marks in Hampton before.
Sean, we had some interesting ones when we did a rum tasting before, like including one from the Canary Islands that was, if I remember correctly, it tasted like I didn't think we should be drinking it for health and safety reasons.
Oh, that was I think that was Madeira. I think that was that Enyos do Norte, I think, and there was like that weird white. Yeah, slightly different. I mean, that's just
Tasted like carcinogens is what it tasted.
Yeah, I think that was that cane juice, that white cane juice rum from Madeira, which was it was kind of neat. Yeah, like I was gonna like single Doug out too. Not even just Doug, but I mean, he said some people want to taste these things. I'm pretty sure you got a couple of bottles, and I'm pretty sure at least I have one. But I mean, because it's fun to try, it's fun to mix, and I don't know exactly how hazardous that stuff is. I mean, your liver filters everything out anyways, right?
Harmony, do you have any thoughts on this rum?
I don't know what it is about the nose of rums that fry my senses so quickly. Like I really struggle with certain aspects of rum. Like I know there's notes in there, but I have a hard time finding them. My notes on this was initially lemongrass, mashed potatoes you tried to grill but burned on the pan, burnt fats, caramelized meats, little bits of plastic. But this is definitely not the most offensive rum I've ever had, and
You're right, it's far from the most offensive rum, but it's a spectrum, and there's a spectrum of Lecheg. So, but when you said potatoes, mashed potatoes, that immediately made me think of like cooking a banana on a dirty skillet.
yeah. I have like grilled burnt meat / fats, caramelized meat ? Like it's just that sort of flavor to me.
Pulled pork, perhaps.
Yeah,
I
I don't know, I like it.
What are your thoughts on this creation?
Well, first of all, I'm horrified that all of you would disparage Lecheg, which is a beautiful, beautiful dirty spirit that
I did not speak as to not fight. I
I
just pretend I don't hear his BS and he speaks this way.
I
So
appreciate, and I
I,
disagree
I
with
just
you.
like poking the bear. I don't know where the bear is, but I'm prodding it for
Uh,
humor.
And I disagree with Evan on so many things, but his love of Lecheg is one of the few things that I do agree with. So let's not go too far down that rabbit hole. But
It's
yes,
almost
to Sean's
its own
point,
category of masochism.
but to Sean's point, there is a certain masochist that loves the insane esters that you can get out of rum. And interestingly, when you put an old peated whiskey in a cask for 20 or 30 years, the peat actually dissipates over that time. So, a lot of folks might have been able to try, old Brora or Port Ellen or Kalila or any of these where, over time the peat just lessens and lessens. For some insane reason, the old rums actually intensify over time. And so I know there was an insane Hampton 29-year-old that the whiskey sponge or rum sponge had bottled that is literally one of the most offensive things that I think I've ever drank in my life. I've gone back to it 3 times. I'm horrified each time more than the last. But it's kind of like childbirth, I feel like, speaking as a man who's never birthed a child, but I feel like it's one of those ones you forget about, you go back and you say, it can't have been that bad. I had a lovely experience or memory of it. And then lo and behold, you come out the other side feeling maybe less so.
It's I had a chance to try. Well, Sean, you were there too. Remember we got to try the Ardna Gherkin at the Whiskey Show London? It was the Adelphi, or did you not get to try that? It was an Adelphi bottling of Ardnamurchan that Angus identified in the warehouse at Ardnamurchan as being just so bizarre that they bottled it as a one-off. It was, and they called it on the label Ardna Gherkin.
That's
It was the most
hilarious.
pickled whiskey I've ever had. Yeah, I've had things like that in whiskey before where I didn't like it, but over time I was like, yeah, it can't have been that bad, and then went back and had it again. Case in point, Loch Dew, the black whiskey, which I've tried twice, both times awful, but there were people who love it, so I suppose there's a market for everything. All right, are we? I think it's time to do the speed round, unless anyone has any other comments on the rums. No, good to go. All right, back to the Bruichladdich. So we're on the 18. Man, maybe it's the rums, and I'm not as much a rum guy, but this smells absolutely gorgeous now. It's like a bag of jujubes and cupcakes. So it's a kid's birthday party, basically. It's a children's birthday party on the nose. Anyone want to add on the palate? Or
There's
thoughts?
there's some cool licoricey notes on the nose coming through now.
So buttery on the palate. Real beautiful. Doug's just nodding. I think we'll take that. All right, Bruichladdich 10-year, a little younger, a little more intense, really malty, really nutty, really honeyed, but still some nice fruits on there. Quite lush, toasty.
I don't think it's changed too much since we first had it. It's just really nice and mellow and just yeah,
It
yeah,
seems
like
more
you said,
drinkable.
malty. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something to have on your shelf. You can have it every day.
Did you want to weigh in on that one, or just nodding, more nodding?
I mean, I think both, the 18 and 10 are really, really beautiful spirits that, for me, I go through waves with Bruichladdich where there's some extreme cask influence that I absolutely love, and there's some on the other end of the spectrum. Both of these, I think I could absolutely disappear to the Antarctic with a couple of cases of it and be completely happy to crush isolation.
Okay, very good. 17-year, the mysterious wine cask.
A
Still
little
not
bit
that winey on the nose, but on the palate, it's really winey.
more like mentholated pipe tobacco, and but it's kind of fermenty as well still, which I don't know, pretty cool. I mean, yeah, stands up just as much as it did before.
You know what it reminds me of now, Sean, is like a really old Crianza. So like an old vintage Tempranillo that's just, it's lost all the fruit and it's just like leather and tannins and spice.
Cool.
Douglas?
Yeah, again, I think this is a really, really beautiful cask that is one of those instances where I think, you know, an independent bottler's done a beautiful job in bottling this, because I feel like this could be some Black Arts release at a price that's far higher than what you were selling it for. And you're, in my humble opinion, crazy for not buying a bottle or case of it.
There you go. Very good. Kalila.
That ozone note comes through a little bit more now.
It's like a wholesome breakfast of like homemade oatmeal. I don't know why it's making me think about that, but it's kind of warming and comforting and satisfying. Like your belly is filled.
Makes me think of being in like the backcountry of Kananaskis. You're like 2 or 3 days in the backcountry. You've got a breakfast dram and a beautiful bowl of oatmeal, and you're just excited to hit the trail.
And your soul is filled.
Aye.
Sean, other than ozone, anything else on that one?
Sorry, I was just typing here too.
Got to focus. This is the speed round.
You mentioned earlier the pea was quite ashy. I think that was also a bit more accentuated compared to last time. A little less leaning into the seafood on the palate, a little bit more into the cindery wood.
Yeah. And hickory sticks. All right, Port Charlotte. Oh man. It's like an over-chlorinated swimming pool. Oh, palate on that is. Yeah, it's funny. Like there's not that much peat on the nose, but on the palate, it really starts to creep in there. Nice spice, nice tarry notes, ashy. Gents, any thoughts?
I guess more than anything else for me, there's just between this and the last Rest and Be Thankful tasting, I feel like there's been a pretty amazing consistency where there's been some absolutely beautiful bottles that they've done, and I find myself being drawn more and more to them, especially in an age where there seems to be more and more IBs on the shelf. This one is one that I have really learned to pay attention to.
Well, and frustratingly with a lot of them, and I think this is the truth of independent bottlings, period, is until you try it, you don't know whether it's going to be good or not. Some bottlers have a better reputation than others, but still, like, does that mean you're going to like it as opposed to it being good or good enough? Yeah, I mean, in this case, and Sean can attest to this, like there was a pretty big offer sheet, but we were pretty laser focused on a few things, partly because we had more confidence. And again, going back to bourbon versus wine casks, there's more confidence there. But in the case of that one Bruichladdich 17, we did get a chance to try it, and that gave us the confidence to buy it, because you don't know with those wine casks what direction they're going to go. So, and I think we're at a point now where we don't want things that we don't know whether we can sell them, because yeah, it's not as on fuego as it was.
And any bottler prices have not really come down all that much quite yet.
Yeah.
With that huge list, the same thing happened with the rum too, because somehow they have just a plethora of old Long Pond, old Monymusk, all these 20+ years, and so much of them, well, like I can appreciate kind of all of them, but I do gravitate toward the more estery kind of fun ones, and so many of them were not that we had to go through and pick and choose and see what we wanted. I think that with these three, I think we picked fairly well, honestly, but I mean, it took a little bit of diving.
Speaking of, back to the Long Pond. I'm pretty sure Long Pond is the distillery. Sean, didn't I have like a G&M 1940 Long Pond? I know Doug's tried it as well.
That's the one. I dream about that rum sometimes.
It's so weird. It's like linseed oil and spearmint bubblegum were the two big things to come off that one for me.
And it absolutely destroys your palate for the whole night.
Yeah.
And much of the rest of the week.
I mean, that's some World War II rum though. Like, you wonder what corners might have been cut in order to just get production out the door.
Well, and you certainly understand that drinking a couple of pints of that as someone in the Navy would stop you creating a mutiny against your captain, certainly.
Yeah. But the funny thing about that, because I know with the Canadian Navy, I think they stopped serving rum to the sailors about 5 years before the British Navy. But the funny thing about that to me is, like, our sailors never had nuclear weapons. The British did. So I guess it makes perfect sense that in an era of, nuclear posturing, you probably don't want to be getting your people half cut just to get through their boring ass day.
I think there is a difference between some of the nuclear submarines and their application of rum versus the
We would hope. I mean, well, the Americans, I'm assuming that just would never have gone down, but who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know much about the British Navy, to be fair, or the American.
Before we move on to the next one, on the nose on this one, I'm starting to get a little bit of like, well, I mean, eucalyptus wood I'll get sometimes on some things, but this is starting to poke out as like teriyaki with like the sesame oil and whatnot.
Noel would say Play-Doh, but he would say that anyway. But I am actually getting Play-Doh.
Cool.
It's interesting. It's tangy, spicy, a little funky. There's some fruits there. Yeah.
Well, moving on to the next one, that vinegar starts coming out a lot more, actually.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's quite sort of tart on the nose. Palate's really fruity, really chocolatey. Some nice spices in there. I wouldn't have known it from the nose, but I think that might be my favorite of the rums just on the palate.
Yeah, I think I was leaning to it in the first taste pass through, but even now you get a little bit more wood on there, a little bit more tannin. It's quite dry.
I want clarification on Jeff's point. Jeff, did the Americans stop giving their sailors liquor in 1842 or 1942? Because I think there'd be quite a difference there. Maybe it's got to be 1942. Oh, no, it just switched to 120 mils. So just enough to
gotcha.
get a little buzz, but not enough to get you really cut. Oh, and then they stopped in 1862. Well, they had to defeat the Confederates, so they had to start taking things seriously.
Yeah, they were losing too many sailors to cirrhosis.
All right, Long Pond 22. The nose on this is just kind of all over the place.
It is kind of that not maybe not perfect, but close to that match for someone who likes peated whiskey and rum, because you do get that nice essence of the rum foundation in the spirit. But I mean, there's no mistaking with what happened with us. It spent time in peated casks like through and through.
On the palate, you do get a little bit of the fruit and then the peat, but you know, it's interesting. But to me, of the rums, like, I don't know, was this the right rum to put into an ex-peated cask? Would it have been better to put like a fruit bomb in here as opposed to something that's not?
Yeah, it's a good point. I I've had a lot of well, not a lot. I've had a handful of things where they blended cane juice and whiskey, whether it be bourbon, Canadian whiskey, or I think maybe just those two I've had, honestly. But I mean, I didn't love them. I think this I can still enjoy more than those two, because maybe the peat just gives it something else. But yeah, but I think you might be right.
Don or Doug, any final thoughts on the rums?
I think it's just super interesting to be able to go through some of these, especially at this sort of age where you've got a little bit of tropical aging, probably much more on the continental aging side of things. And, a bunch of time, generally the continental aging is happening inside of England and Scotland, depending on where it is. Most stuff goes through EH Shear out of the Netherlands, but their high-end stuff that they want to age for some time, they send up into the UK, or at least did pre-Brexit. So it just adds a different dynamic. And generally they put it into old used casks that just a little bit of time. So really, really neat to be able to try some of these bit more naked spirit.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to trigger the vote here. Now, Evan's got three questions. I haven't looked at them. But you get your first favorite, your second favorite, and then what was your favorite whiskey or rum? So there you go. You got three questions to answer there. Sean and Doug, before we get to that, I would like you guys to tell me what your three favorites were tonight, if you can.
Oh, it's rough.
Yeah, it's tough, which I think is a testament to how good and consistent everything was, where I feel like I could switch my vote if I were to spend another couple of hours with all these different drams.
I think, okay, so like if I were to do number two, I'd probably say the Monymusk, the 24 year.
Okay.
Number one, I'm gonna say, well, I don't know if you want all of them, but yeah, no, sorry,
Yeah, I want your three favorites.
okay. So number two, I'm gonna say the Monymusk. Number three is actually going to be a tie between the Port Charlotte and the wine cask Laddie, because I can't decide between those two. They're both quite good, but kind of on par for me. Number one is the Laddie 18, though. I think that took it for me.
Cool. Doug? Have you decided?
It's tough. Much like Sean, I'm gonna struggle through this. Going from left to right for me, the 17-year-old Bruichladdich in the mystery wine cask, actually I absolutely loved the palate. The Kalila 14 I absolutely loved. I do have a huge bias to Kalila, and actually the Long Pond 22, the last one, there was somebody mentioned cigarette butts, but that ashiness in there really struck home for me, that I feel like I could probably go back and forth between all of them. They're all very, very close for the rums, but probably the Long Pond 22 eked out the win. But again, the Bruichladdich 18, the first one that we had, has a very, very honorable mention for me as well.
All right, I'm gonna go I'll go in reverse order. Shockingly for me, my number 3 is the Monymusk 24. I like how fruity that is on the palate. It's something I could actually see myself drinking. My number 2 is the Bruichladdich 17, which is like mind blowing to me. I like how sherry cask it is like on the nose, and then the palate might not be sherry cask profile, but it's good. And then that 18 is just classic. Like it's absolutely gorgeous, clean, beautiful. The Caol and Port Charlotte were great. I mean, the 10-year-old laddie and there was a lot of things in here tonight that I could have voted for. So it was a tough call, but yeah, I liked one of the rums. I was not expecting that. I was also not expecting the wine cask Bruichladdich to be one of my favorites. So there you go. No, my second from favorite, the 18-year-old bourbon. Sammy, just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. The 18-year-old bourbon was my favorite, but the 17-year-old wine cask was my second. So, all right, the poll. Let's see how we're doing here. We're just about done.
These results, by the way.
That's
What's
what the heck. The results are crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Here are the results. We have a 4-way tie for first. 5-way. Is that right? Yeah. 5-way tie for first between the Bruichladdich 18, the 17, the Port Charlotte, and the Long Pond 24 and Monymusk. That's insane. I've never seen that before. Second favorite, Bruichladdich 18.
And the
Tied
long
again with the Long Pond 24. So I think the Bruichladdich 18 and Long Pond 24 are aggregate winners here. Port Charlotte looks like it would be the third. And then whiskey or rum, and rum wins. You guys can't see this, so I'll share it so you can see it now, what we were talking about there. But those are some unusual results. Yeah, an interesting lineup. I mean, the lineup was the lineup because this is what arrived. So it was 8 of them. It made for a great tasting, but did not expect to see that. I don't think we've ever seen that in a tasting before. Normally there's 1 to 3 things that like stand head and shoulders above everything else, but tonight that was not the case. So cool. Thanks for joining us. I know this was a bit of a weird one, but I think it worked out well. Doug, thank you for stepping in on this tonight. And yeah, did you literally just do that again with your thumbs?
What the heck is that?
Oh, like that. See, he's got AI following him, Sean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
he's just, what you need is you need the bat signal or whatever now where there's like a smoke bomb and then you just click like leave tasting. Oh, the heart.
That's
Very,
hilarious.
very cool. Too hip with the kids, some might say. Too hip. But anyway, we're jealous. Sean, thanks for this. Harmony's already left. Thank you to her for that. Everybody, thanks for taking part in the tasting. Get a Mac. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Anyway, until next time, all. Thanks for taking part. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.